role and relevance of research methods in issues related to law and development. And I'm given to understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, that I would be predominantly addressing the lawyers community at CMR. In other words, few faculty and PG and UG students whom I would be, addressing. Without getting into any further nuances, if I may just tell you, I would be touching upon three important aspects, if not anything more. Number one, I would try to really tell you how there are some different ways of classification as far as research methods are concerned. There are different approaches as far as classification of research methods are concerned. That is what I'm going to really, give you some kind of an idea. Two predominant schools who classify, research methods. One school classifies it into two, and other classifies it into almost four or five methods. That is what I'm going to explain to you. And I'm going to really explain all the methods by taking some kind of, let us say, simple, understandable examples. And number three, the outcome of this particular presentation, at the end of the day, you would understand different methods in social, what you call a science research. And you would also understand how to pick the most appropriate among the methods when you are trying to investigate, when you are trying to do your respective research. So, what is that we can identify? What is that output we can identify as the product of this particular discussion? I would say the greatest outcome of this particular session would be we will get to know together which one is the most appropriately suited legal methods, or let's say research methods, for our legal research which we may intend to undertake. And those who are already, undergoing, see, already, conducting a research, ongoing research, they can able to fine tune their research methodology to some extent. And number two, although, the introducer, my friend, she has already put you on instructions that you have to keep your mics muted and your camera closed all the time. This is probably to avoid disruption or to save some kind of a bandwidth. I completely appreciate that. But subjected to that larger or general instruction, if you have a compelling, what you call as necessity to ask me some kind of a question, please do not hesitate to just raise your hands. Once you draw my attention by raising your hands, I would probably allot you some amount of time, or I would stop by and ask you to ask your questions. Otherwise, also, in whatever the remaining time, around 40 to 45 minutes is what I have slated for my presentation. And after that, I would any which ways opening the floor for some sort of discussion. There you can actually ask your questions and try to really find the clarification from me. And to the extent possible, I would provide you some kind of, let's say, answers. So, without any ado, I would say we will try to understand something relating to social science research methods. When I'm talking of research methods, they are predominantly adopted for the purpose of doing research. That is why instead of talking of research methods, if I talk about the method of research, because a lot of UG students are also there, I have the greater responsibility and onus of taking them along with me. Those who are in already in post graduation, they would know because this appears to them to be the most rudimental. But I'm specifically addressing my friends who are in their UG course. See, if you ask me, any research you try to really do, be it social science research or otherwise, or a science research, This is starts with, the research starts with asking a question. You first try to raise a question as to why a particular phenomenon or why something is happening the way it is happening. And as far as possible, I try to take examples from the legal, what you call as a discipline itself, because we all are lawyers. That is one advantage I have, because I have a homogeneous group of those who are budding lawyers and those who are already lawyers. Now, let's say a question that comes to me is what you call as creativity, or we are talking of what you call as judicial activism. While reading, I come across a statement or a sentence that India has shown unprecedented judicial activism compared to any other democracies in the world. So that actually pings me, or that actually pricks my mind, so that I start raising a question why and what exactly is the reason India has shown that kind of unprecedented, what you call as legal activism. So that question gets raised in my mind. So this actually instigates any further research on the topic. So, my dear friends, asking a question, a query entering somebody's mind, is considered to be the seed or genesis of the need for research. Then, what you started doing? See, once that question starts bugging your mind, you start reading here, there. This is what we, in technical sense, call it as literature survey. I try to read little more deep into the subject. Why? What could be the reason? In other words, instead of me trying to do some kind of a research myself, instead of attempting to do the research myself, I try to always say, if somebody has already done this research, by any stretch of imagination, I cannot consider myself to be the only person, sane person in this world to whom this question has started haunting. There may be a lot of earlier scholars to whom this question, they might have encountered this kind of a question, is it not? So if they have done already some kind of a research, why do I unnecessarily waste my time and energy for reinvention of wheel? So what I do, I actually try to do a research survey, or what you call as literature survey, and try to find out whether there is any work that is already done in that particular area. If that work is done, my research question doesn't arise at all to move further. It is not necessary for me to move further at all, because already my question, whatever the question I was entangled with, gets answered. If that question is not available, then I try to develop by reading whatever is there. See, most often than not, when you raise some complex questions, you find, you find no direct answer in the literature survey. So when I really look at different, what you call as people, different authors, different schools of thought, then I get to know there is no the answer I am getting. At that time, I try to formulate a hypothesis. I try to formulate a hypothesis to identify the existing knowledge gap, saying that, oh, now I'm confirmed. This is probably the first time, or this is the area where the knowledge gap exists, and I need to fill that particular knowledge gap. Let me do whatever I can possibly, in my command, to find out an answer to that question which is yet to be answered. So this is how formulation of hypothesis would take place. But let me also tell you, my dear friends, life cannot be defined through these logical flowcharts. Life is an experience by itself. Sometimes it is not by reading you raise a question or by observing you raise a question. Sometimes these questions naturally starts bugging you. That is why when it comes to formulation of hypothesis, maybe a well-read researcher, maybe a person who is endowed with the research acumen, when he reads, he may tries to identify. He may identify some area where the knowledge gap exists, and to fill that particular knowledge gap, he may attempt to, develop an hypothesis. This is one route through which hypothesis gets developed. The second one is it is a simple hunch feeling. Sometimes what happens, it is not by research, it is not by preliminary research, literature survey. Suddenly it occurs to my mind. What is that? Oh, all the students or the current generation is much more tech savvy compared to the earlier generation. So this is going to really impact the way they understand, the way they try to, let us say, relate themselves. So at that time, what happens? It is not a hypothesis or anything which arises because of my reading. It's a hunch feeling. At that time, again, I can go back from, instead of going further, I go back to the existing literature and try to read about that. So when I read, I possibly find out, oh, there is no satisfactory answer to my question. Then I try to design and conduct a study, and that study I will undertake, and the findings of that, by the findings of that study, I will draw conclusions, and then I would report the results to the entire world. This is how pretty much the research is conducted. So you raise a question, and then you do a literature survey, you formulate a hypothesis, and to answer that hypothesis, you design or conduct a study and draw conclusions, and then you publish your report or publish the research to the whole world. I don't really think anybody would have any difficulty in following this particular flow. This is how pretty much, be it science or social science, research is conducted. Now, I will try to really go a little further. And I would try to say, when you are talking of classification of research methods or method, there is one school which very simply but very, very effectively divide research methods into two classes, namely doctrinal method and non-doctrinal method. I don't know, maybe in your research methods course, or maybe in your, let us say, other courses, some of your teachers must have already mentioned about this doctrinal and non-doctrinal. A doctrinal method is one where you do not actually get outside your library or a study table. That is why it is also popularly referred to as, sorry, doctrinal method. I'm first starting from a non-doctrinal method. When I'm talking of non-doctrinal method, it is also popularly referred to as arms chair method. What do you mean by that? I do not really try to go anywhere else. I confine myself to the four corners of, let us say, a good library. Right? And I consult all the papers which were in existence. All the papers which were in existence. Or all the researchers which were conducted earlier. Or all scholastic articles on the subject. And on that basis, I try to develop my thesis, or I try to develop, develop an analogy which answers my hypotheses. We call it as non-doctrinal method. And in comparison to non-doctrinal, the doctrinal method is getting up from your arms chair, getting into the society and trying to generate data. And from that generated data, you try to, conduct your research. American, scholars generally call doctrinal method or doctrinal research as action research. So you do not lazy around, some earlier, literature. You just get up. You show the agility of getting into the job yourself. Get into, the society. Consult people, talk people, try to develop insight. And whatever the insights you have developed, you will try to capture them in a logical manner and then, write it as your research paper. This is what is a doctrinal method. I hope. See, if you want an example, I can give you an example. See, I had two people in my postgraduate diploma in medical law and ethics, which I continue to coordinate. This program is offered through distance education mode, and nearly 99% of people who enroll for this particular course are medical doctors from very many disciplines. Right. But anyway, that much of information is more than sufficient to you to understand what I'm trying to say. I had two scholars doing their research on only one subject, that is consent and medical treatment. And I'm sure each one of you know or can appreciate if I say, if I'm a doctor, before I attempted to treat the patient or before I start treating the patient, I require the consent of the patient. Without proper consent or without valid consent on behalf of the patient, I am not supposed to treat. And if I attempt to treat a patient without consent, then what generally happens is it amounts to battery, because I'm using force against somebody else's person without there being permission for me to use that force. So consent, as far as medical, what you call as treatment is concerned, plays a very significant role. Now, you consider one scholar whom I had for enrolling for my PGDMLE, he did a non doctrinal study of that. What is that non doctrinal study? He, took nearly all the case papers. See, not sorry, case papers, nine. I'm saying all the research articles published in India and in England on the topic of consent and medical treatment, right? In last 5 years, half a decades, he took half a decade as a time period, and he collected all the papers which are published in India and in England on the subject of consent to treatment or consent and medical treatment. And he studied them, and on that basis, he developed a kind of, what you call as thesis. He concluded saying that there are two schools of thought as far as consent and medical treatment is concerned. And how, I will not get into the nuances of that. And on that basis, he developed his analogy or analysis. So, what is the use of this non doctrinal method here? How this particular research helps? Instead of me wasting, and he said, he had to write a dissertation, which he wrote by spending nearly 7.5 months time. So, the next scholar like me, scholar like you, if we are interested in knowing what kind of, let's say, developments or what kind of scholastic articles or literature we have vis-a-vis the particular area, namely consent and medical treatment, we need not have to spend nearly 7 months time. By just reading his article alone, we would be able to get a clear idea, or we get a good picture as to how scholars have opined or scholars have written regarding this. Is it not? It is a non-doctrinal, method for you. But the other, scholar whom I had, when it came to, what you call as this consent and medical treatment, he said, sir, I would do a doctrinal method. I asked him, what do you mean by doctrinal method? I will not try to really repeat whatever the earlier scholars have repeated. I would select 80, what you call as a group of 80 people. Among them, 20 are the patients, 20 are the doctors, another 20 are attendants of the doctor, and another 20 are paramedical forces. So I'm going to circulate a standardized questionnaire to them, collect that data, and from that data, I'm going to develop my thesis. And of course, he did. What are the findings? What is the thesis? We need not have to bother now. But he did not really rely more upon what was written earlier. But he wanted to generate a fresh kind of an idea, or he wanted to get into the people, get into the society, get into the people's mind, and try to find out afresh as to what is this. So doctrinal method and non-doctrinal method is one such classification. But before I proceed any further, my dear friends, I wanted to tell you there are some biases which you might probably see. There are some scholars who always boast of doctrinal method and who try to slight non-doctrinal method. And there are some there are some researchers who are biased towards non-doctrinal method also. But I personally feel both these methods are equally important ones for the purpose of conducting a research. This is one thing you need to keep in your mind. You can't say doctrinal method is the better method than the non-doctrinal or vice versa. Both are very important depending upon what kind of research you people are undertaking, what kind of hypothesis you are trying to test. On that basis, you can actually try to understand. See, let me just give you a small example, and then we can go to the second classification. But before I go to second classification, let's see how I can impress you with this example. I had one proposal which I had to vet few months back. She is a lady scholar from, she is already teaching, right, in one of the NLUs, National Law Universities. She submitted a proposal for her PhD. At that time, that proposal was sent to me. And there, what is her hypothesis? I would paraphrase. She wanted to know the efficacy, right? How appropriate, efficacy is how appropriate she wants to examine the mediation as a method to resolve family disputes. Once again, I repeat, she wants to know, you have a lot of family disputes reaching family courts, is it not? So she wanted to know how effectively, these family courts, family disputes can be resolved by taking recourse to mediation. This is what her hypothesis is. She wants to test the efficacy of mediation in resolving. Then she says, I will do she adopts a non-doctrinal method. Well, I asked her this question during interview. I asked her this question. If I were to be you, or if you ask me, I rather feel doctrinal method is the best method. But how you are going to adopt a non-doctrinal method to evaluate the efficacy? Then she said, no, I have a lot of, articles, sir. I have collected as many as 150 articles on this. So because of this 150 articles, I should be able to answer the hypothesis or test the hypothesis without doing doctrinal method. Then I said, oh, if you have already collected more than 150 articles, can you share me the list? In fact, she has done a lot of work. So immediately she shared the list with me. Then I said, all this list, if I go through, how many of the articles really say or articulate and say, to resolve family disputes, mediation is the best method? Then she said, almost all, sir, 90% of the articles what I have selected, or 100% of the articles, all of them say this is the best method. Then I said, then how do you really, because it is lopsided. If everybody is saying, can that be taken? As a researcher, when you are trying to really test the efficacy of that prescription which is being prescribed by the earlier writers to do your research, I would rather say how you will contrast or juxtapose that. Because every single article you have picked up, it is being said. You cannot say 150 articles which I have collected. Nearly 145 articles say it is the best method. And another 5 say it is not a best method. Because majority of the scholars are of the opinion that this is the best method, I also consider this to be best method that cannot be research. That is why I advised her, keeping this as a thesis. This is what, all the scholars or majority of the scholars have opined. Now you try to get into the field with that and try to verify how many, disputes get resolved through mediation and what mediators have to say for that. You try to look that. That is why doctrinal method is probably the best method, I advised her. And I also said to her, if you really look at the list, all these authors whom you have quoted are Western authors or foreign authors. None of the Indian author I am able to find opining the same way. I hope you are getting my point, what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen. And one more thing, if you really look at the dispute, on one hand, you take a family dispute, on the other hand, you take a commercial dispute. One of the major differentiating factor between these two disputes is, in a commercial dispute, parties still want maybe one of their portfolio or one of their transaction has run into the problem. But whereas both the parties still would like to continue with their business relationship, because both of them are dependent as far as their business needs are concerned or economic needs are concerned. So there, my opinion is your mediation works, because somewhere a good mediator who can able to absorb that ego, if he can absorb or he can take that ego, parties will shake hand no sooner than later, because parties really wanted to continue. They have ongoing other transactions of business also. But whereas in family disputes, parties have almost, what I can say, especially in Indian scenario or Indian circumstances, have taken a hard stand when they approach the court. Almost all, the first natural recourse is mediation because of our socio-cultural sort of a background. So I do feel in India, it is not going to be efficacious, or it is not going to be, proved that way. So, my dear friends, what I'm trying to explain to you, I hope I'm not bombarding you with more and more complex sort of a concepts. I'm only trying to really explain to you by taking this example. Don't go under the impression that a doctrinal method is superior than non-doctrinal or otherwise. Both these methods are equally important and relevant, not only now, but in the days to come as well. Because there are some authors I have read, they are of the opinion this non-doctrinal method will soon disappear because of your information and AI and information technology. I don't really think AI and information technology, if not more, for at least another 100 years to come, cannot make this particular method useless. I hope I have made myself clear. Now, I will come to the second classification. The second school, it is a second school of thought where instead of keeping it very simple like doctrinal and non-doctrinal, this school says these are the 5 methods, that is survey method, experiments method, field research method, secondary data method, and textual analysis. These are the 5 methods they talk about. I hope you are getting my point. And the very interesting, what you call as analogy of this particular school of thought is, when you are talking of doctrinal and non-doctrinal, there is no pure doctrinal and non-doctrinal approach possible. I repeat once again, my dear friends, when you are talking of doctrinal and non-doctrinal, they say there is no pure doctrinal and non-doctrinal method at all. How do I explain it? See, I would explain it by taking the same example I took. Like, the scholar who intended to find out the efficacy or effectiveness of mediation in resolving family disputes. See, what is a doctrinal part of it? She has formulated that hypothesis by reading nearly 150 articles that she has collected, right? So it is nothing but non doctrinal research. This has led her to a hypothesis, whether it is a correct prescription. Somewhere in some corner of her mind, she believes this particular prescription of scholars is not correct. That needs to be tested in Indian culture, that needs to be tested in Asiatic culture. And that is why she is undertaking the research. And that research necessarily happened to be, or necessarily that has to be, a doctrinal research. So you find doctrinal and non-doctrinal fused together. You cannot classify them in strict concrete wall lying in between. That is why they said instead of doctrinal and non-doctrinal, every research would involve a mix of doctrinal and non-doctrinal. That is why they try to talk of survey method, experiments method, field research method, secondary data method, and textual analysis method. But before I go any further, I saw one of the scholar raising his hands. That was, I don't know, he has unraised his hand, but somebody raised his hand. Who was it? I saw a hand going up while I was speaking. Is there anybody? Otherwise, also, is there anybody who wish to ask a question right now? Okay,
None as of yet, sir. I think that we
had Amit or somebody who raised, because I did not register because I was concentrating on my delivery, but I did saw somebody's hand going up. Maybe that was by mistake, I suppose. But now Afreen has raised his or her hand. Can we allow Afreen to raise his or her question?
sure, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Afreen, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Good morning, sir. So my question is, what's the difference between the non-doctrinal and the secondary data? Because there is something similar between these things, the non-doctrinal and the secondary data. Because we are in non-doctrinal, we search and we interpret by reading the literatures already. It has written before. So I think these two are same, the non-doctrinal and the secondary data.
Okay. Afreen, if I may ask, are you in UG or PG?
UG.
Okay, very good. See, that is what I could guess. Are you from science background or humanities? My guess is you are from science background. Is that correct?
No, I'm from business background.
Okay, that is commerce. Okay. See, what I'm trying to tell you, thank you very much for raising that question, Afreen. I would like to say one thing. Don't take it as an answer, because I 100% agree when you are talking of secondary data and non-doctrinal method, they are probably one and the same. I agree with her. But I wanted to really tell you from the Afreen's question, I get to tell you one thing. When you are talking of doctrinal and non-doctrinal, I said the second school believes no research can purely be a doctrinal or non-doctrinal research, is what I was explaining to you. Isn't it? Similarly, when you are talking of the second classification, that is second school's classification as survey method, experiments method, field research method, etc. See, there is substantial overlap. You don't try to, lay concrete wall in between. Like if somebody asks me a question, sir, forget about what Afreen has asked for a minute. The second school you are talking of, sir, even experimental method for that matter, can be a non-doctrinal. Yes, that is how there exists some kind of a overlap. Don't try to define these things. That's what I'm trying to consciously tell you. Try to really go with the flow and try to understand what I'm attempting to explain rather than trying to take, oh, survey method. The moment I talk about survey method, don't attempt to differentiate it from experiment method, field research method, secondary data method, textual analysis method, and further doctrinal and non-doctrinal and things like that. No. See, when I said doctrinal method, I get into the field. When I'm saying non-doctrinal method or arms chair research method, I confine myself to library and reading the literature from the comfort of my armchair. See, this is how one after another you try to go, because whatever the research method you would adopt, you would not adopt only one research method. You would actually sometimes adopt, or most of the times you adopt to be successful researcher, the multiple methods or hybrid methods. I hope I have answered not only Afreen, but many of such students of mine who were like Afreen. Now, I will tell you what exactly is a survey method. See, when you are talking of survey method, my friends, this is one of the popular methods that is adopted by action researchers. It is collection of data from predefined group of respondents to gain information and insight into the issue of interest. So you actually conduct a survey, and by conducting a survey, you try to find out. And the data is, the data is generally obtained through standardized procedures. Like you may circulate a questionnaire. That is one of the, kind of a thing. Or you have the questionnaire with you and you ask your, what you call as population, the people whom you have chosen to answer those questions, you ask those standard questions to all of them, and their answer you go by ticking. So you generate that primary data and you analyze that data. And when you're talking of survey methods, there are certain advantages. It's a very accurate kind of a method, and it is easy and quick to analyze, and ease of participation also because of the development of technology. See, earlier, to conduct a survey, a person should have lot of patience and perseverance. If you are collecting, questionnaires from 100 people, then you would have really struggled a lot. But today, it is not like that. See, during those days, when I enrolled for my PhD, completed my PhD, at that time, we never had these Google forms and things like that. So whatever my research guide used to say is, okay, if you want to have a survey method, you prepare a questionnaire. You send the first wave of questionnaires, second wave of questionnaires, then you need to follow up, etc. But today, all that is not a big deal, because you can, at the click of the mouse, you can send all the emails to all the people whom you have identified from whom you would like to collect the responses. So because of the technology, survey method has become the best method. But one thing, a word of caution when you are trying to use survey method, my dear friends, survey method often doesn't reveal you the real thing. Like I'll just, don't think I belong to any political party, but just to convey impressively what I'm trying to say, I'm taking this. If I conduct a survey at National Law School of India University and see How effective you think the administration of the present Vice Chancellor? See, there are three types of responses you may find. Response number one, you may find that a student who doesn't want to antagonize, he says, any which ways I'm going to be here only for temporary period. That is only for 5 years. This is going to be my abode. So why the hell I try to antagonize? Although he thinks, the present dispensation or administration is bad, he may say, oh, it is good. Or it may be vice versa also. He may think it is actually good, but he doesn't want to say it is good because he wants to criticize. He may say it is bad. This is the first category. And the second categories of people, second category of problem with regard to survey method, you don't expect a person to apply his mind before answering. See, I am asked to fill a Google form. Generally, what happens, no? When you go to collect your car after service, the person who hands over that form insists that you should fill it. Because there are certain systems, there are certain schemes in which he would be considered if there are good, reports against, good reports about him. So he always insists. You are in a hurry to drive your, collected car back to home. So you just fill something. Most often than not, you fill without really applying your mind and you try to say he is good. That's all. Or otherwise, sometimes without applying mind also, you may say he is bad, whatever it is. So you can't ensure people actually apply their mind and, fill those forms. And the third and the last response is, whatever the response that has been given, it is generally seen. This is what psychologists say. I have a friend of mine who is professor at NIMHANS. He always says, nearly 70% of the people, when they encounter the situation of answering, what you call as these questioners, they are not honest. 70%, believe me, of them, according to him, are not honest. This is what some of the studies conducted worldwide has shown. So whatever the thing you get from the survey or whatever the interpretation you get from data requires further analysis. Otherwise, what happens if you simply go by the count of responses? You may not probably reach to the truth. This is what, ladies and gentlemen, a survey method to you. Now, experiments method. Generally, experiments method was earlier. If you go to some of the classical textbooks, they used to say experimental method is largely adopted for science research. And for social science research, you do not do the experiments, or experimental method is not suitable. But those days are gone now. See what happens in experimental method. The research conducted with a scientific approach using two sets of variable. The first, constant. The first one is a constant generally, and the second one is a variable. Like I'll give an example, then probably you will understand. Generally, of course, don't take it too personally. I have had one of my friends telling me, sir, people from West Bengal show this kind of a tenacity. So he is referring to Bengalis trying to head the organization, and that organization would show probably a particular kind of a behavior. I hope you are getting my point. Wherever you have, a person with economics major heading the division, he would always have communications which are not so clear. See, these all are very, 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 what you call as, we generally say, these are stereotyped expressions. You can't expect anything better when a Bengali heads the organization, sir. See, don't take it personally. There may be a lot of Bengalis here who may be listening to me. If you want, you can take Kannadigas for Bengalis. So at that time, a researcher would like to know, look, is there any correlation between Bengali and that sort of a tenacity or that kind of a behavior? So you keep a Bengal or Bengalis as a constant and try to compare it to different variables. At that time, you come to some kind of a conclusion. We call it as experiment method. This method allows you to test your idea in a controlled environment before going further. Why many of the classical authors feel experiment method can only give you the real sort of a picture only when you do it in a controlled environment. If that controlled environment is not there, then the experimental method would obviously not give you the accurate results. I hope you are getting my point. See, it is not like, you see one Bengali in one organization and you get the idea, oh, in that organization, there is a problem like this. Second Bengali, there is a problem. Third Bengali, there is a problem. So with some 10 such Bengali organizations which are headed by Bengali, you come to the conclusion, oh, wherever you have, Bengali bosses, you have these type of problems. It is not a correct depiction. Maybe out of the 10 organizations, real 8 organizations, the real person who handles the administration may be somebody else. It is only, the de facto, the control is in somebody else's hand. De jure, this Bengali may be lending the name. So it is not a controlled environment. So what I'm trying to say, experiments method, unless it is conducted in a controlled environment, would not yield accurate results. Now, I have field research. See, when I'm talking of field, there is a small typo. Please pardon me for that. If when you are talking of a field research, my dear friends, it is understanding and interpreting another person's social world through accessing their lived experiences. See, what do you mean by that? I don't circulate a questionnaire. Like when I published, my last publication was, that is, I'm saying publication in the form of a book, was in the year 2009. And surprisingly, it may be because now no more I work in that area, environmental law. I did work on environmental decision making, an EIA model. That was my, book which I published. At that time, I could not have really gone with a questionnaire. I chose to interview nearly 20 to 25, what you call as top personnel in the area, discipline. I moved from one city to another city, nearly 16 cities. I traveled in India and took an interview of those people whom I have already identified. I sat with them. It is an unstructured interview. I sat with them. With one person, though, I had to sit 3 times and then developed that insight after listening to him very carefully. I hope you are getting my point. See, let me give you a very simple example. If you consider National Law School of India University is a success model or is a successful, law university. If you prepare, a questionnaire and circulate it to nearly 120 people in NLSIU or associated with NLSIU and ask them a very simple question, saying that what you think had contributed to the success of National Law School. People may, just to dispose of their obligation of filling the questionnaire, may write one line or one sentence saying that it is administration. Somebody may say it is Madhav Menon. Third one, it may say other professors owning the National Law School or innovation at National Law School. See, they may randomly write 1 or 2 sentences like that or 1 or 2 words like that. By collating that, you may not really get a clear picture. So really, if I wanted to understand the success of that particular organization, I needed to sit with the people who have worked long-standing relationship with that organization and involve them in some kind of, let us say, dialogue, and then insights I can probably able to develop. That is why, field research becomes very important. There are three different ways in which field research can be, uh, conducted. One is direct observation. Rather than asking questions or, asking them to explain or express, you go and directly observe. You sit next to them, keep observing. Why law school is so well? You get into their classroom and sit there and observe the classroom proceedings. Is there something, innovatively the classes are taught there? You go to their halls of residence, observe the students whether they put in lot of efforts than other students elsewhere in studying. So this is direct observation. Second one is participant observation, means you will also become a participant and try to enlive that experience by yourself. And the third one is qualitative interview. Qualitative interview means you would sit, because somebody was telling me, my teacher always used to give this example. I still remember. He said, if you wanted to really understand why ISRO is today considered to be one of the pioneering, what you call as organizations in the world, you rather go there and interview the head, interview the people, ask them why you think ISRO has attained this kind of a success. So this is what, ladies and gentlemen, field research for you. Now I will come to secondary research. When I'm talking of secondary research, it is a research method that involves using already existing data. So you are not going to create data, you would be using the existing data and interpreting them. Like example, data obtained from public libraries, websites, data from other surveys, government reports, and things like that. I don't really think I need to go any further and explain to you here, because you can very easily, most of you know what a secondary research is all about. So you read whatever is the existing literature and try to further manipulate or further, what you call as interpret the existing literature and data. And this is also popularly known as desk research or non-doctrinal research. This is what my friend Afreen was, expressing. Textual analysis. This is most of the contemporary authors on the subject do not really explain textual analysis mostly, because they consider this to be part of the earlier one itself. The earlier one is secondary research. But in textual analysis, what happens? A research used to describe, interpret, and understand certain of the texts. Because whenever the text you are reading, you must read it in a context. This is what always we say. The text needs to be read in context. If the context in which the text is written and the context in which the text is being read are changed, then you would probably have different interpretations. And these textual analysis, actually come into existence only to understand the texts which are popularly referred to, etc., better. Especially for religious, what you call as literature, this particular methodology is being used. For example, if you are trying to see the description or mention or prescription of Quran or prescription of Gita, what does it actually mean? This is what is textual analysis is all about. So, my dear friends, I have given you, if I can come back, these are the two predominant schools. One is a doctrinal method and second one is a non-doctrinal method. This is one school's classification. The benefit of this, what you call as classification, is it is very, very simple and effective. The second school classifies the methods into 5, namely survey method, experiments method, field research method, secondary data method, and textual analysis. And I have explained very briefly by taking some simple suitable examples all these methods to you. Now I think precisely I have taken about 45 minutes explaining all this. Now we can throw open the entire flow. Excuse me. And I would like to, see you have any questions to raise.
Thank you for that wonderful session, sir. Participants, if any of you have any questions.
Oh,
So the first question from Gautam NEK. And he says, in survey method, how can we verify or encourage honest responses from the respondents?
Okay. See, there are two ways of answering Gautam's meritorious question, my friend. See, one of the inherent problems of survey method is, as I have already explained it to you, nearly 70%. See, I don't know how accurate this particular reading of 70%, but I just, when I was talking this with that professor of NIMANS, who happened to, enroll for his PhD under me, and he completed his law PhD. Although he was a doctor, he enrolled for a medical legal subject in law school, and he completed. At that time, he gave me this reference and said, nearly 70% of the time, people are not honest when they are filling the questionnaires. So one thing is, when I know this is exactly what is the outcome, how I can make them honest, the answer I also do not know. This is one way. That is why rather I would not go for survey method. Rather, I do not go. Or even if I adopt survey method, I try to further interpret it. I try to provide them some kind of a weightage. Let me explain that to you by taking a simple example. Let's say Gautam, who has asked this very meritorious or a very good question, I consider him to be the general manager or vice president of Hyundai services. That is, he takes care of all the vehicle services of Hyundai Motors in India. He is a country head as far as services is concerned. He would now circulate a questionnaire. When the questionnaire, he receives all the questionnaires which are answered, he receives. He will probably get some person is to be extremely, people applaud him. People say he's the best service manager, etc. Yes, you do give some kind of a weightage for that. That's all. You don't consider them to be a gospel truth. You don't go by that score itself. You further try to interpret it. This is what, the limitation of survey method. This is one way of answering. I very consciously keep it in my mind that people are not honest. That is number one. And number two, I try to really give due weightage to whatever the data I generate through survey method. I do not entirely play upon the results of the survey. I hope you are getting my point. This is one way of answering. The second way of answering Gautam's question is, this is what some of the authors, some of the American authors do try to advise us. They say, you have some kind of, let us say, questions, right? Which are like, opposite to each other. Like if you answer one question as yes, you have to necessarily answer the other question as no. You cannot obviously answer both the questions yes. So you load such questions into the questionnaire. And when a person has actually not followed that pattern, he answers both the question in positive or both the questions in negative, which it cannot be. So at that point in time, you discard that particular survey, or that response you discard, because the person without applying his mind has ticked it. This is how you can take it. I hope you are getting my point. Like, you are trying to collect something, saying that, oh, Professor Nandimat, as a teacher, you wanted to know how he is. The first question, do you think Professor Nandimat is honest in discharging his duties? Always, he says, yes, he is. Another question, related question, which will not occur immediately next to that question, did Professor Nandimat show any dishonesty any times? The answer should be no for that. You cannot have yes and yes to both. Then you can easily identify, the person has filled the survey form without applying his mind. So these are the methods. This is how I can answer Gautam's question. I only hope Gautam is satisfied with that.
Indeed, sir. So the next question comes from Rajesh N. And his question is, what is the standardized and reliable legal research methodology used before the internet era?
Okay, Rajesh, if I have understood your question, before internet era, what was the standardized and reliable legal research? I don't really, think you can answer that kind of a question by saying one method or the other. The reason is this, my friend Rajesh. Depending upon the subject matter, depending upon the complexity of the hypothesis, you need to develop your own research methods. You're getting my point. See, it is not one research method or one standardized method would answer all the hypotheses or test all the hypotheses. That is why I don't really think answering that question in any way is necessary. Earlier also doctrinal and non-doctrinal were very important. Today also doctrinal and non-doctrinal are equally important. Are there any other questions, my friend?
Thank you so much, sir. I think Sandeep Nair wants to ask something, but I guess he's still typing.
Okay. Or he can ask. He can unmute himself and ask his question if he is comfortable.
Sandeep, do you have a question that you would like to put forth?
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Sir, my question is based on these researchers. Now, I've been a research student during my MBA days. So during that time, what we have noticed is we initially do the research, and after that, due to lack of time, they would require 100 or 1,000 people to be surveyed. So once we do a survey of around 100 people, what we do is we get an analysis, we get a trend. So based on that trend, we start fudging the other records. So what is your opinion on such kind of surveys, sir?
See, answer, I'm sure, Sandeep ji, you also know what is the answer. There are two, points I would like to, or two ways, again, I would like to answer Sandeep. The first way is, as a researcher myself, or what I can say, a student of research myself, I always attach lot of importance to ethical, research. I can, for that purpose, I can say today I have collected 7,000, samples who probably criticize a particular move of the government. What I have done is I have fudged everything myself. Sitting in my computer or sitting in one place, I have fudged all the records myself and I published that as a report, which is probably a bad one. Because it is one person 700 or 7,000 times trying to express that repetitively. It is not 7,000 people anymore expressing. So there is one very simple stereotyped answer. The second one is, Sandeep, when in real world this type of things happen, why these things happen? A, because you have chosen a wrong research design. Like when you said, as a boss, I want you to collect 7,000 samples. I want you to collect 7,000 samples, but I don't provide you enough resources. When I say resources, it is not just money and facility, but even time. I don't give you time at all, but I would expect 7,000 responses minimum. At that time, you are forcing people to be unethical. You can't expect that research to show a better result. And today, that is what, if you read one of the recent, the current, what you call as economists on stands, they try to really say, in your so-called social media today, who is controlling the conversation? It is handful of people. It is only handful of people who are at the end of the day calling shots by your so-called social media. See, it has nothing to do with research, but they are creating an opinion and they are influencing the opinions, public opinion, which has emerged as a biggest concern today. I hope you are getting my point. So, Sandeep ji, I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. If you have subsidiary questions, do not hesitate to ask me.
Any more questions from the faculty?
If you type, you can just unmute yourself and ask if you have one.
Okay. So I have a question.
Please.
So when we frame a questionnaire, and since we come from like the legal background, so most of our works are in some way related to the society per se. So in your opinion, do you think that when we make the questionnaire in a way that it makes the respondents vulnerable to some extent, will that be a more positive?
On the kind of questions you are asking. You get my point. What I'm trying to tell you. See, you imagine, society like South Korea.
Yes, sir.
Right? You imagine a society like South Korea, and you wanted to ask them the effective questionnaire asks them about effectiveness of their current administration or the government. See, without really attempting to do that, I get to know what is going to be the response I would get on paper, no? Because I'm definitely going to put people to that kind of a vulnerable position.
Right.
It's almost like Sandeep's question I was answering, no? I want 7,000 responses minimum, but I don't give you even 7 hours. Obviously, I'm forcing you, right? So by doing that research, you are forcing people to write something which they would dishonestly any which ways write.
So
Right.
a follow-up question.
1 minute. Answering your question, my friend, what I would say is, see, when you try to prepare a questionnaire, where and when this questionnaire is a ideal, what you call as methodology, you need to figure out first. Otherwise, what happens? You may do a questionnaire method and you collect data, and that data is not worth even the paper on which it has been, submitted. Now you ask your follow-up question, my friend.
So my follow-up question is that instead of going with like, let's say 100 participants of surveying them, should we just survey 10 experts in that field?
See, it is like this. If you wanted to, replace survey method, one possible way is you try to talk to people, that's all. It is like this. I'm not talking about experts, because you wanted to find out the sentiment of peasants or farmers or sentiment of laborers, right? Against the present dispensation. At that time, talking to some experts will not give you that insight at all, no? But the best thing is, instead of asking them to put down in writing as a response, one possible way is, I'm not going to insist that you have to write your name and identify yourself. You can be anonymous. See, that can ensure a bit of honesty. Or still better method is, I will just go and sit with them. It is what is called as a participatory, what you call as observation. You don't tell them you are doing it for research, you are going to write. You will just simply ask them, saying that, okay, what you feel regarding the present dispensation? Are you comfortable, not comfortable? Immediately people may say, I'm very comfortable. Oh, he's the best, premier, or he's the best chief minister we can possibly get. But after that, you develop some kind of a rapport and relationship with that person, respondent. After that, once again, you repeat that question to him. At that time, he says, look, I generally try to say that he is good, but I have my own reservations. And after another 3 weeks, he may probably start scolding that premier. So this is how a researcher needs to put lot of thinking in designing his method. If the method is defective, his findings are also defective. That is what I was trying to tell you. I hope you are getting my point. So answering long and short answer to your question, extended question, my dear friend. If you want to know experts and develop an insights, best is experts only, whether 10 or 100 or 20. But if you want to really know the sentiment of the people, then experts cannot really substitute those people. No, it's like that.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Good afternoon, sir. I have one question. Myself, Manjunath.
Yeah.
Sir, I have a question on this, particularly on legal research problem. One particular legal research problem, some highest court decision already been ruled out.
Yeah.
So, if further, if I want to do research on that particular problem, if it is already decided by some highest court, then what way I should like further what I can do in addition to that researcher? If I
Manjunath ji, I understood probably your question, because there is one school which says if the highest court, like Supreme Court, already has said something, what kind of a research I can do? I'll give you an example. See, Supreme Court, in one of its cases, that is I call common causes, you must have also learnt about this judgment or heard about this judgment. It said, if a living will is to be executed or advanced medical directives are to be executed, what is a procedure? So they have now laid it down. Now, nothing should prevent me as a scholar to respectfully differ from the Supreme Court and try to say, no doubt Supreme Court, keeping a great ideology in its mind, has written like this. But in implementation, it would create a lot of problems for the executors. See, this is not, a subject matter of contempt of court. You are trying to develop further insight. Or let me take one more very simple example by taking a very popular case. Your Shabarimala's judgment. See, if you follow the basic route to this particular judgment as equality, that is saying that, okay, everybody should be treated as equal. You cannot differentiate from, woman and man. So yes, this is correct. That's what Supreme Court did. But if I apply the principle of what the law courts should attempt to do and what the court should not attempt to do, because matter of faith and belief, we generally say, this is what not me saying, it is Savini during those days, a great sociologist, said, law's limitation is it cannot deal effectively with matters of faith and belief, he said. So when you have matter of faith and belief, when you know law is very less effective, should you have gone further? See, it is trying to develop perspectives. That's all. You are not demeaning the Supreme Court. You are not showing disrespect to the Supreme Court. That's why I'm saying, respectively, you try to submit your analysis of this. Unfortunately, this is not what is happening in India today. And according to me, that should happen. Otherwise, what happens? We start taking whatever the Supreme Court or the highest court having the authority deciding, we take that to be a gospel truth. So where is Indian jurisprudence developing? I hope you are getting my point. That is my answer to your question, Manjunath ji.
Thank you very much, sir.
Any more questions?
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Misbah Shwan.
Yeah.
I have a question that while writing a research hypothesis in a research paper, how do I go about with it? Because while writing a research paper, I get really confused that am I just supposed to read 2 to 3 articles and based on that have some kind of a knowledge and come up with some hypothesis? So could you give some tips on that?
Misbah, it's a good question, but I have my own inherent limitation in answering that question, because how the when you have a hypothesis, how that hypothesis you have arrived at depends upon 2 factors. It is what I explained to you during my presentation. One is you do reading, lot of reading and literature survey. At that time, you come out with a hypothesis. That's one method. But another method is you suddenly that idea strikes your mind. Intuitively, you come to that hypothesis. And the philosophers say, if you are unbiased intuition, without any hesitation, I can tell you 99% it would be true. If it is unbiased intuition. So sometimes hypothesis also you may frame intuitively. At that time, what happens? When you want to conduct a research on that, generally people will quiz you. Okay, how did you form that sort of a hypothesis? Sir, I formed it intuitively. Okay, it may be your intuition which has given your hypothesis, but is there any earlier such researches done? Did you do research survey? If you say no, I will not allow you to continue with your research immediately, because I don't want reinvention of a wheel. That's all. I hope you are getting my point, Misbah.
Yes, sir.
You wanted to add another additional question to what I'm explaining to you? It appears to me you are not fully satisfied. That's why I'm asking.
No, sir. No, sir. I'm satisfied. I understood.
Okay. So that is why, one is doing research. See, when you Google, suddenly somebody, your son asks you, or, my brother, your younger brother asks you a question. At that time, you start Googling. That is also research. Don't think research means you are ultimately enrolling for PhD, MPhil, or writing a dissertation. That is also research. But when we are talking of formal research, we try to streamline. We don't want reinvention of wheel to happen. That is why we always say we attach a lot of importance to how many articles you have read, whether you have read all the recent articles, if not 100% of the articles published ever since mankind has originated. But at least have you read some of the prominent pieces by prominent people in this area? Have you read? Why we ask? We don't want you to repeat what already has happened. That's all.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any more questions on the floor? Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for your sagacious words and insights on the particular topic. It has been a complete delight to listen to you. And with that, we would like to move forward with the session. And I would like to welcome Ms. Tarzana P.A. from First Sem LLM to give the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tarzana. I'm here to present vote of thanks for today's lecture. I would like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. O.V. Nandimat sir, for enlightening us with his knowledge. Today's talk was full of knowledge and it gave a deep insight to the topic. So the point where Nandimat sir told us about, where he has given us example when he was talking about doctrinal and non-doctrinal research method was very helpful and it was very informative. And I'm pretty sure by now we have a thorough understanding as to how to pick an appropriate method for a legal research or a research asset. And this information will help us in our studies and in our future as well. So once again, I would like to thank Dr. O.V. Nandimat sir for taking out time from his busy schedule and enlightening us with his knowledge. I also thank Dean Mr. Subramanya sir and a Vice Principal V.J. Praneshwaran sir and faculty members. Thank you so much. And also thanks to all the students who are present here and who has paid attention here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much for giving a patient hearing to me. Thank you.